My name is Alberto. Until a few months ago, I would have described my life as a happy and stable existence. I had a nice house, a good job, and above all, Guadalupe, my wife of almost 20 years. In addition, we shared our home with Regina, our daughter, who curiously is almost the same age as our marriage. She was born shortly after our wedding. Despite the difficult times at the beginning, I always believed that we were a solid family. It never crossed my mind that what I considered my ideal home would turn into hell in such a short time. My day-to-day used to be predictable. I would get up early, have breakfast with Guadalupe and Regina if she was not rushing off to university, and leave for the office. I would return around 7 or 8 at night, depending on my work commitments. At that time, the house would come alive. Guadalupe would ask me how my day had been, and Regina would sometimes come out of her room to tell me some anecdote from her classes. I loved that family atmosphere. It made me feel that all the effort and long working hours made sense. Even the weekends seemed harmonious. Sometimes we would plan outings, eat together at a restaurant, or simply watch movies in the living room. Routine had never bothered me because I always considered that family life had its own rhythm that I liked. Nothing, absolutely nothing, made me think that Guadalupe was not satisfied with that stability. My trust in her was total. That is why, when I received that email, the ground opened up beneath my feet. It was just another day at the office. My inbox was full of work emails, project notifications, and advertising. Among all that sea of information, a message without a subject, sent from a strange address, caught my attention. I thought it would be spam, but something pushed me to open it. The content left me stunned. It was a series of sharply taken photographs. In them, Guadalupe appeared entering a hotel with a man I had never seen in my life. I observed the details, his hand on my wife's back, the way she smiled as she walked through the door, the obvious complicity. The worst thing was the date and time indicated in the record of each image, as they showed that the encounter happened at times when I believed she was busy at home or with routine activities. My world came crashing down. My eyes were fixed on the screen, unable to look away from those images that were repeated one after another. I tried to find some absurd explanation. Maybe they were manipulated images. Maybe it was a bad joke, but the reality was undeniable. I clearly recognized Guadalupe, her clothes, the way she walked. Everything matched. I did not reply to the person who sent me the email. I saved the images on an external hard drive and deleted them from my office computer. My head was pounding. I felt the pulse in my temples. I remember that day I could barely concentrate on my work. I left earlier than usual, with some excuse. On the way home, my mind was filled with intrusive thoughts. Since when has this been happening? Am I going crazy? Why would someone send me this? The questions crowded in. I could not find a way out. I did not want to rush or accuse her without proof. But at the same time, I had very clear proof. When I arrived, I felt unable to confront her immediately. I found her in the kitchen, making tea as if nothing had happened. My breathing became heavy and a shiver ran through my body as I thought that maybe 1 or 2 weeks before she had been with that man at the same time when I believed she was calmly cooking at home. I made an almost inhuman effort not to show my bewilderment. She smiled at me, asked me how my day had been, and I just mumbled a curt fine. That night I could barely sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, trying to find a comfortable position, while my mind raced, imagining scenarios. On the one hand, I thought about waking her up and demanding an explanation. But on the other hand, I was terrified of the answer, whatever would happen to me. The next day, I woke up with huge dark circles under my eyes. I got up without greeting her too much and went to work feeling down. During the following days, my attitude changed. I could not avoid it completely, but I began to avoid deep conversations. It was impossible to hold her gaze without my heart trembling. When I was with Regina, I forced myself to put on my best face so as not to raise suspicions. However, my daughter noticed that something strange was happening. As she asked me insistent questions about my mood, she would say to me, "Dad, are you feeling okay?" And I would feign a neutral mood. "Yes, daughter. It is just that work is very heavy." The lie weighed on me, but I did not want to involve her in something that, at first, I believed only concerned my marriage. In those days of uncertainty, I decided to take a few days of vacation from work. I had accumulated several days that I almost never used, so I just sent an email to Human Resources requesting immediate vacation. I gave them some medical excuse, saying that I needed a checkup. Fortunately, they did not ask me for further explanations. My plan was to get away from my routine for a while to reflect. I told Guadalupe and Regina that my boss was sending me to a course out of town, but the truth was that I stayed at a hotel in the same city, a discreet place where no one would easily recognize me. I needed to think. I checked into a simple room overlooking an interior courtyard. Without luxuries, I stayed there, immersed in my thoughts, trying to figure out what had gone wrong in my marriage. I remembered our first dates, when Guadalupe and I met at university, the walks around the city, Regina's birth, the way we supported each other financially when money was not so abundant, remembering the gifts she gave me, the family parties where we were seen as the ideal couple. How could all that come to nothing? My bewilderment turned into desperation. The hotel had a small bar on the first floor, and I started frequenting it. I returned to old habits that I thought I had forgotten, drinking alcohol excessively, smoking cigarettes alone on the terrace, my head full of images of my wife with that stranger. For long hours, I only thought about whether I should confront her or even beg her to leave that man. Or worse, the temptation to remain silent and pretend that nothing was happening, for fear of losing her, crossed my mind. However, the humiliation of being cheated on was stronger. Insomnia became my permanent companion. The mirror returned the image of a defeated, aged man with an empty gaze. The idea of hiring a private investigator seemed like something out of a movie, but I saw no other way out. I needed to know the whole truth. I made a couple of calls, looked for references, and found a guy who accepted the job without question. I gave him the photographs I received by mail so that he had a starting point, along with some routine information about Guadalupe, schedules, friends, places she frequented. I asked him to be extremely discreet. I could not stand the idea of anyone but me knowing what was going on. One afternoon, while I was still at the hotel, I received the first update from the investigator. He confirmed that Guadalupe had indeed been going out with that man, whose name was Daniel, for some time. According to the report, they saw each other at that hotel and in other less crowded places, such as restaurants on the outskirts or isolated parking lots. I wondered why, out of the blue, someone would have decided to send me that email with the photos. However, I still did not know the magnitude of what was hidden behind those outings. Without thinking, I engaged in behavior that I am not proud of. I accessed Guadalupe's social networks and emails without her permission. I kept the passwords of each family member in a very private place, as I was meticulous and controlling in the digital sphere. She and my daughter never changed them, so it was relatively easy for me to do so. That is how I discovered messages that were not only between Guadalupe and Daniel, but also conversations with my daughter, Regina. I read them with a heavy heart, my fingers trembling as I went from one line to another. In those messages, Regina not only showed knowledge of the infidelity, but openly supported it. There were phrases that turned my stomach. "Mom, let me know when Dad leaves so you can see him in the afternoon." Or, "Do not worry. I will tell Dad that we are going shopping if you take the opportunity to see him." It was a double betrayal. I never thought that my own daughter, whom I considered my adored little girl, would be cooperating in such a cruel deception. And, to make matters worse, the text indicated that it was not something recent. There was data from more than 5 years ago. 5 years of lies, complicity, mockery behind my back. I felt devastated, unable to react. How to confront my wife and my daughter at the same time? It seemed surreal to me. Still, between tears and rage, I made the decision that I was not going to stand idly by. If Guadalupe did not respect me and Regina had betrayed my trust, the least I could do was protect my future and unmask that farce. I did not want to be left as the naive one who, after 20 years of marriage, lost everything and left empty-handed. Something inside me broke forever. I contacted the private investigator again and told him what I had discovered about my daughter. I asked him for more information, and I asked him to record everything he could: videos, entry and exit records, phone calls, anything that would serve as evidence. I became a cold, methodical man who no longer wanted to suffer, but to protect himself and take revenge for that blow. The investigator was quite efficient, and after a few weeks he gave me material that confirmed dates, times, places, and Daniel, always accompanied by Guadalupe. With all that information, I met with a lawyer specializing in divorces and explained the situation to him. I explained that I wanted to shield myself from any accusations, and that I also wanted to cut off my legal relationship with my daughter. That sounded tremendous even to my ears. But at that moment, I felt so disappointed that the mere thought of continuing to pay for university and other expenses seemed unbearable to me. My lawyer looked at me incredulously. It did not seem common to him for a father to renounce his daughter in that way. But I was determined. We developed a detailed plan, safeguarding all the evidence in a secure environment, ready to present it in case my wife and daughter tried to sue me for any reason. A few days passed until I chose the right moment to strike the final blow. I had everything prepared: copies of the divorce petition, printed evidence, and legal documents stipulating a minimum pension and the waiver of my obligations to Regina once she reached the age of majority. It was vital for me to make it clear that, after fulfilling the legal requirements, I did not intend to have any further relationship with her, although it is horrible to admit. At that moment, I considered her as guilty as her mother. She had deceived me at a level that I never thought possible. Remember, for more stories like this, subscribe, like, and activate the bell. Let us continue. The date on my calendar arrived. A day like any other, without parties or gatherings where there would be unwanted witnesses. I sat in the living room of the house with the bag of papers next to me, and I summoned them both. Guadalupe, at first, came in with a normal face, and I sensed that she thought it was a family chat or something trivial. Regina arrived a few minutes later, frowning, asking if something serious was happening. I asked them to sit down. You could cut the tension with a knife. I took a breath and told them, in the calmest voice I could, that I knew everything. I told them that I knew about Daniel's existence, that I had photos, videos, and messages. I explained that I had discovered how Regina covered for her. I was as firm as the trembling of my hands allowed me to be. Their reaction was immediate. My wife stood up furiously, denying everything and accusing me of having delusions of persecution. She called me crazy. Regina let out a couple of insults, saying that I was a controlling man who spied on their lives. I had never heard such a tone of voice from my daughter. They looked like two defensive people, attacking me mercilessly to save their own skin. It did not surprise me, but it hurt me more than I can describe. I expected at least a hint of regret from Regina, a tear of remorse, or for her to say, "Dad, I am sorry," but that did not happen. They agreed to question my sanity. They said that if Guadalupe was seeing Daniel, it was only for business, something ridiculous, since the photos showed otherwise, that I was a paranoid man who imagined things. They tried, as a last strategy, to turn the situation in my favor. You are an absent father. That is why you made us suffer, and Guadalupe sought comfort. Regina spat with contempt. That degree of cynicism exceeded all my limits. Without further ado, I took out the divorce papers and an envelope with the legal documents regarding my relationship with Regina. I gave them to them, telling them that I would not allow any more humiliations. I explained that I was disassociating myself from all emotional and financial commitment to them, except for the minimum legal part that the judge imposed on me, or that I, out of decency, wanted to assume so as not to break the law. I told them very seriously that this was final. Guadalupe's eyes widened in astonishment, and Regina was silent for a few moments. Afterwards, they both burst into fury and insults, shouting at me that I had no right to do that they would make sure to paint me as an abusive husband and father. I told them that I was not surprised by that threat, as I had anticipated it. Then I pressed a button on my phone, showing them how I had been recording everything since the conversation began. This way no one will believe your lies, I said with a voice full of pain. Guadalupe gave me a look of hate, and Regina put her hands to her face as if trying to hide her shame or her rage. Without saying another word, I got up, took my bag with the evidence, and left the house. I will never forget their screams behind me, trying to delegitimize my pain and blaming their own deception on me. With a broken heart and watery eyes, I left that place that I once considered my home. I went straight to a hotel, again to stay. I felt that my world had been reduced to a suitcase and a pile of papers, but at least I had the certainty that I was taking control of the situation. A few days later, the legal notifications arrived. Guadalupe and Regina, as they threatened, filed complaints for psychological abuse and excessive control. They tried to get a court order in their favor, claiming that I was violent and irrational. I was not surprised. My lawyer and I had anticipated that they would resort to these tricks to keep the house, most of my income, and perhaps hefty compensation, but I was prepared. On the day of the hearing, I presented all the documentation that my lawyer had meticulously organized. I showed the photographs, the investigators' reports, my daughter's messages. I explained that I had not obtained them in a very clean way, but that there were compelling reasons to do so, and that, in any case, they confirmed Guadalupe's infidelity, who had also been violating the marital fidelity agreement for more than 5 years. I showed that Regina, already of legal age, conspired with her mother to deceive me. I showed them the recording of the final confrontation, where they could be heard insulting me and admitting some facts in their attempt to unnerve me. Guadalupe and Regina's defense fell apart with each piece of evidence. Their accusations of abuse, having no support or witnesses to corroborate their stories, were called into question. The judge was skeptical about their claims, and not even their lawyers could maintain a coherent line of defense. The room fell silent when I played part of the recording where Guadalupe threatened to make me look crazy. It was a bitter moment, but at the same time, I felt satisfied that the truth had come to light, however cruel it was. The outcome of the trial was quite favorable to me, although at the time I felt it was a sad victory. I was granted the divorce without complications. The house, the car, and most of the assets remained in my name. Guadalupe was granted minimal compensation for the years of marriage, but much less than she intended. Regina, being of legal age, was granted only temporary support that did not mean much. I had offered something symbolic, enough not to be seen as a completely irresponsible father before the law, but without further involvement. I did not even bother to look at their reactions when the judge read the verdict. Upon leaving the courtroom, I ran into Guadalupe and Regina, who were waiting for me in the hallway. They tried to intercept me with downcast looks, trying to find a shred of compassion in me. Alberto, please, forgive everything. It was not that serious. We can fix it, Guadalupe told me with tears in her eyes. Regina, for her part, wanted to use emotional blackmail. Dad, I did it for Mom. I never wanted to hurt you. Give me back your love. I stared at them. I admit that a part of me shuddered to see my daughter begging, but I was determined not to give in. I listened to them for a few seconds and then replied in a firm voice, "Do not look for me anymore. I do not want to see you again. Your deception made me see the truth. If you were capable of this for years, nothing guarantees me that you will not do it again. Go back to your lives and forget about mine." I felt a lump in my throat, but I stood my ground. Guadalupe, desperate, blurted out something that still makes me nauseous when I remember it. "It was only once. Daniel does not mean anything. We can open the relationship if you want. I will not hide anything from you again. But come back." That seemed to me one of the most unworthy proposals anyone could make, as if she was trying to exchange my broken trust for a supposed permission to maintain her double life. A shiver of repulsion ran through me. I looked at her with all the contained pain. "You disgust me," I said, without mincing my words. "A person who can betray like that and then pretend that nothing happened does not deserve another second of my time." She tried to touch my arm, but I backed away. I said everything I had kept quiet for years. I expressed my disappointment. I emphasized how much humiliation I had endured without knowing it, and I made it clear that there would never be any reconciliation. Then I gave Regina one last look. She had started crying, her hand covering half of her face, murmuring my name. I remembered so many times that, as a child, she would say to me, "Daddy, I love you," and hug me. Now all that seemed like a simple illusion shattered by the complicity she had with her mother. With a surge of determination and infinite sadness, I turned around and left. It was the final goodbye. The following days were a transition. I sold the house, which by then seemed like a space full of bitter memories. I also resigned from my job, as it generated too many links to the past. With the money from the sale and my savings, I bought a small apartment in another city, far from everything that reminded me of Guadalupe and Regina. Many people ask me how I could take such radical measures. I answer that when pain reaches a certain level, the need for a clean slate becomes imperative. I no longer felt attached to anything I had built for 2 decades. In my mind, everything was stained by disloyalty. I left behind friends, neighbors, and relatives who connected me to that old life. A few friends learned something about the story, but I did not give too many details. I simply explained that I went through a complex divorce and preferred to start over somewhere else. My lawyer continued to advise me remotely for the last formalities of the liquidation of assets, and little by little the process was concluded. I never received a message from Guadalupe or Regina again, or if they did, I had changed my number and email address. The silence was total, and that suited me to move on. One afternoon, while I was finishing unpacking in my new apartment, I sat on the balcony with a beer and contemplated the unknown city where I now lived. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like calm. The pain was still there, latent, but there was some relief in knowing that I no longer depended on the approval or love of those who had hurt me so much. I remembered Guadalupe's face at the hearing, the way Regina tried to manipulate me, and I understood that the past could no longer be changed. I could only move forward. Today I remained determined not to resume contact with them. My trust was trampled on, and I know that I could not bear another disappointment. I have not heard from Daniel again, nor am I interested. I suppose he either left the city or continues with his life. Or maybe Guadalupe continues seeing him. I do not care. I have not resumed any serious relationship with anyone new either. I am focused on my work, which I got in this city, and on my well-being. Sometimes I go for a walk in the park, enjoy a sunset, and think that, despite everything, I am free. The people around me that I deal with today do not know that dark part of my story. They do not know that I was about to beg for affection from those who betrayed me. They do not know that I almost drank my sanity away in a dark bar at the hotel where I took refuge. They also do not know that I was on the verge of madness when I discovered the complicity of my own daughter. And, in reality, I do not need them to know. That experience lives in me like a deep scar. but it made me wiser and perhaps firmer in my convictions. Sometimes, at night, I wonder if there will be a day when Regina regrets lying to me for so long. If she will look for me, repentant, to tell me, I am sorry, Dad. However, if that day comes, I do not know if I will be able to forgive her. A part of me still wants to understand her, justify her because of Guadalupe's influence. But the harsh reality is that she actively participated in destroying my peace. For now, there is no room for reconciliation. I face each dawn with the certainty that I did what I had to do to protect myself. Sometimes, when my mind wanders, I remember the photographs that were sent to me that day and think about how curious it is that an email triggered the end of 20 years of marriage and the breakdown of a father-daughter relationship. It is certainly a very high price, but also, perhaps, it was the only way to open my eyes to the truth and incidentally give myself the opportunity to be reborn. I am no longer the blind man who lived to the rhythm of a deceptive routine. Now I am someone who, although hurt, has a new horizon, one that I am building far from lies. I have started seeing a therapist. I want to process the mixture of sadness, anger, and relief that I still carry inside. He encourages me to leave resentment behind, to seek, if not forgiveness, at least acceptance of the facts. Maybe one day I can remember Guadalupe without hate and think of Regina without pain. Maybe it will be possible to see the past with some compassion, both towards them and towards myself. But, for now, I know that I needed to cut it off at the root to be able to breathe and not drown in disappointment. Thus concludes, for now, my story. I am a man who lost almost everything in a matter of weeks, but who gained, if that is possible, the opportunity to start from scratch. I abandoned the place that saw me grow and that saw me love to relocate far away and feel safe. I keep what belongs to me, and I have no outstanding accounts with the law or with their deceptions. If Guadalupe and Regina intend to strike a final blow, they will find nothing but an impassable wall, my absolute determination to keep them out of my life. In the end, one clings to dignity when everything else vanishes. I do not know what the future holds for me. Maybe in a few years I will decide to rebuild my life with someone else. Maybe, with the help of my therapist, I will stop asking myself every day how it was possible for everything to fall apart like that. But at least when I look in the mirror, I no longer see the confused man trying to find an excuse to believe a lie. I see someone who, with all his flaws, opted for truth and firmness, paying whatever price was necessary. And that gives me the peace of mind I need to move forward. With my head held high and my heart mended, I walk without looking back. And there, in that act of daily courage, my new life begins.